So if we can just keep it like a chat, if that works for you, I will. How do you pronounce the name of your company?
Delectabulles.
Delectabulles. Okay. All right. Fabulous. All right.
It's a word game.
Yeah.
Delect means to savor, and bulle means bubbles.
Oh, I love it. And I love that your title is Chief Bubbly Officer. So I think that is fantastic. Okay, so let's just jump straight into it. I appreciate you taking some time to share some of the amazing work that you do with people that are interested in the body of work that I have around luxury as a mindset. And the reason that I reached out to you, I had seen an article that you had published, and Lucy from Champagne Every Day had shared an article that you had written about the 5 best champagne bars in Paris. And so that one article took me down a rabbit hole to have a look at your whole social media presence, your offerings. And there were some things I loved about what you do, Cynthia. I love that you are for women, that you are curating experiences for champagne houses that feature women, where women have a really important role in the house. But also, I love that you help women feel more confident in their choices when they're choosing wines. And so what I thought would be fun for people to know about is just a little bit about your career and your perspective around luxury. So in our time together today, that's what I'd like to achieve. Sound okay?
I'm in.
Tell us a little bit more about your career journey and how you ended up in such a phenomenal business that you've designed, experiencing luxury every day, I guess.
I suppose you could say that. It's a little bit of I'll give you the short version, but about 30 years ago, I came over to do a master's in art history, Canadian. And when I was living in Canada, I went to a from France high school. So I have the same education of French people, which made it easier for me to integrate. But while I was at university, I fell in love with wine and cheese, and I needed to figure out a way to stay in France. And so while I was a starving student, I offered my services to hang the exhibitions at the Canadian Cultural Centre. And to make a long story short, I ended up getting a job working at the Canadian Embassy. And the first 2 years I was there, I was doing mostly logistics for G7 summits and high-level visits. So I got to meet basically the most powerful and interesting Canadians doing what I was doing. I got to have a tete-a-tete with the Governor General of Canada and drink wine with him while everyone else was out partying. The two of us were sitting down, drinking wine. And the internet was just getting started, and I had to work a lot with the press attaché of the embassy, and we really hit it off. And he said, "You have to come work in communications." And I said, "Okay, to do what?" And he said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And the internet was just starting. And I told him, "Look, you send a lot of French journalists to Canada to brag about the fact that we're at the leading edge of new technologies. Have you seen the embassy website? It's awful. I would like to build a new website for the embassy." And I taught myself how to code, and I launched a new website for the embassy. And then the Canadian government started borrowing me for any type of web project that had a international component. And I was evaluating a website, Jobs for Canadian Youth, and there was a section working in an international organization. To make that story shorter, I ended up working at the OECD, which is an international organization here based in Paris. It was set up as part of the Marshall Plan to help Europe rebuild. So I managed their digital communications for 16 years as an international civil servant. I got to work with 30 different nationalities, figure out how they work, their styles, their ethics, and so on. How to communicate on the web was my expertise. And a couple of days before my 50th birthday, I was informed that I was getting reorged out. And I mean, that happens to a lot of 50-year-olds. And I have to say that it was probably a blessing, not even in disguise. because I was suffering from every type of stress-related illness. I was always on, always working. I was in a golden cage. You know, it was great money, but I was always working. And I'm lucky that I have a sister who lives in Paris. And I was like, you know, I've had enough of dealing with big egos and internal politics. I want to do something that makes me happy, because I had the luxury of knowing that when I was 60, I would be getting my OECD pension. So I had 10 years where, you know, I didn't have to obsess over money. And I wanted to do something that made me happy. And my sister said, well, wine's your passion. Why don't you do something about wine? And so that was the little light bulb that went off in my head. And I thought I knew a lot about wine, but I figured it would be better to get a piece of paper to prove it. And so I signed up for wine school. And a week after I signed up for wine school, on my last day at the OECD, I was asked to teach an international MBA class at a university in Paris. And while I was teaching at university, I had 20 students, 19 of them were young women. And during the breaks after class, they'd come and pick my brain and ask me all kinds of questions. And it didn't have anything to do with the course material. It was more, can you take a look at my LinkedIn profile? I've got this really difficult manager. How should I deal with him? And I was like, wow, there's a lot of young women out there that want to be mentored and coached. And at the same time, I had more time to catch up with women my age. And so in their 50s, who were sitting on mountains of experience and knowledge. They had been there, done that, saw the movie, got the t-shirt. They'd finished their, you know, they had proven to themselves they could have a career. Their kids were pretty much raised, and they were at the stage where they wanted to give back. And at wine school, I realized two important things. One, the more you learn about wine, the more you realize there is to learn, because it touches on everything. You know, history, geography, chemistry, all of that. And so I decided to specialize later in sparkling wines, more as an intellectual challenge, because Champagne is probably the most complex of all the wines. You know, it's a blend of grape varieties, of plots, of villages, of years, and the list goes on. Now, when I look at a wine that's one grape variety from one year, I'm kind of bored. So, but the most important thing was also just how male dominated the wine industry was in France. You know, like, I'm a 50-something woman. I don't have to prove anything to anyone. So I was pretty good at defending myself, but I put up with so much crap as not just a woman in France, but a Canadian woman in France in wine. Okay. And so I connected the dots and decided to create Delectabulles, which at the beginning was supposed to be a champagne networking club for women, where champagne was the pretext to get women together and network, to get those younger women and older women together and sip champagne. At my very first event, I realized that women could tell me if they preferred champagne X or champagne Y, but they didn't understand why. So I designed a workshop specifically geared towards women to give them the tools and the confidence to better understand what style of champagne they preferred and why, and how to get the best bang for their buck, because 70% of champagne is purchased by women.
Which I read on your site, and I thought that was phenomenal. You have some really interesting information about not just the percentage of women that buy, but also the amount of women that are involved in the industry in champagne as well.
I try to use a lot of data and back what I say. And that, I think, comes from the 16 years I worked at the OECD, which is known for its comparable statistics. And it's an evidence-based organization. So I try, you know, like, there's so many urban legends and myths around champagne. I've burst quite a few bubbles with my facts, but I try to keep it as evidence-based and fact-based as possible.
I love that. One of the things that we did, we commissioned a research study, as you know, because I went to a research firm and I said, look, I think luxury is a mindset. can you go out and make sure I'm right? And the research firm were like, Neen, it doesn't work like that, but we'll do a research study and this is what we'll find. So what was interesting was when they came back with the results, they said, well, you were sort of right. They said, Neen, there's not one luxury mindset, there's 4. And the research, which we focused on women leaders who had made the luxury purchase within the last 12 months, is that everyone purchased luxury, but people look at luxury very differently. People define luxury very differently. And you're in this luxury industry, champagne perceived as luxury, wine, luxury, the luxurious opportunity in people's 50s to make a career choice is amazing. But what does luxury mean to you?
So when you see, I don't even see myself as in someone working in the luxury industry. Okay.
Interesting. Tell me why.
Because to me, luxury isn't about money.
I agree.
It isn't about things.
Mm-hmm.
It's about privileged access or unique experiences.
100%.
For example, when my daughter was 3, I organized a weekend away to celebrate my partner's birthday. And it was in a village owned by Georges Blanc, a 3 Michelin star chef. Okay. Poor Phil came down with a really bad cold. And so I canceled the 3-star Michelin restaurant and we went to the brasserie next door owned by Georges Blanc. Okay. And we're eating, and at dessert time, my 3-year-old was eating this raspberry sorbet, and she's just in ecstasy saying, Mama, this is the best ice cream I've had in my whole life. And just at that point, Georges Blanc happens to walk by and he starts laughing. And he said, that is the ultimate compliment for me. He said, so many adults come up and, want to compliment me, but children are pure and their palates are more sensitive. And what your daughter is saying means the world to me. And he said, how long are you in town? And I said, well, actually, we're coming back. We're here all weekend. She said, come back to the brasserie tomorrow night. I'll bring my 3-year-old and I'll cook for them. Okay. So
I just got goosebumps. What a wonderful opportunity.
And so it was in his brasserie, but it was watching my daughter cook and taste things that Georges Blanc was making that weren't on his menu. That only he and his daughter were eating. I got the leftovers. I was happy about that. But, it wasn't about money because it cost a fraction of what the 3-star Michelin next door would have cost. Yeah.
I think there is a misconception that luxury equals expensive. Something that was fascinating about my research was, while all 4 mindsets view luxury in different ways, there was some consistency, Cynthia. One was that it was more about luxury experiences over things. That came through loud and clear, that people wanted more experiences than things. And also too, luxury was often for some, for the luxury lover, one of the mindsets, the archetypes we have, for them, luxury is behind the scenes, exclusive access, like sitting down with your 3-year-old while the chef and their 3-year-old, you have that opportunity. And so I feel like what you're providing to women is, through educating them and helping them understand why they love what they love, they then have the confidence to know what to order or where to go, because your business isn't just about the teaching, it's also about creating experiences for them, right? And events. So while you may not see it as luxury, I think it's interesting how others do and how we all perceive luxury, which is fascinating. When you think about what you wish more women leaders knew about this whole idea of maybe champagne or using sparkling, I think of it as a lovely luxury. I love everything that champagne symbolizes. I've always been a champagne drinker my whole life, which is unusual in America, because when we first moved to America, you go out to order and people would say, beer, wine, iced tea, and I'd ask for champagne and everyone would say, what are you celebrating? And I was like, life. Like, it's my drink. It's always been my drink. And so in Australia, as you know, it's so common to order a glass of champagne. So I found it very fascinating. But when I think about what leaders need to know about luxury, women leaders, let's focus on them. What do you think are some things that are important for them to know?
Oh boy, maybe how time with the big boss might be perceived as a luxury from their employees. You know, for example, I don't know, for high performing staff, you might want to organize a really nice lunch with the boss. And it doesn't have to, I mean, it can have champagne and amazing food, but the luxury is more having quality time with the leader and getting to pick their brain, getting to know them, having that access.
Access. Yeah, it goes back to what you're saying about access. Access is so key. I love that advice. That's really great. How do you think leaders can bring luxury into their everyday lives?
I mean, one of the things I love about champagne is that it has this magic ability to transform an ordinary moment into an extraordinary moment. You know, I'm known to pop a cork when I finally get around to vacuuming. So, because I hate vacuuming.
I have visions of you, Cynthia, with the vacuum in one hand and, you know, in the glass in the other.
So I drink the glass after, but maybe learning how to celebrate moments, you know, with or without champagne, but celebrating them with champagne certainly makes them feel special.
Right.
You know, like it could be, you know, a particularly good job done on some project or a new relationship built, or, you know, it's learning how to celebrate those little things.
I love that. One of the books that I wrote years ago is called Attention Pays, and it's really about being intentional with your attention. It's about creating moments that matter, giving significance to those moments, you know, so everyone feels very seen and heard. I feel like champagne often gives something significance. The sound of the sigh when it makes, when the, you know, when the cork is released, or pouring and watching the bubbles all float to the surface. You know, I think it just gives it that little bit more luxury for people who do enjoy that. When you think about your career in champagne and wine and all of the work that you've done, do you have a favorite champagne story or an experience that comes to mind?
I mean, God, it's my life.
I know, and I saw on your website all
uh,
experiences around the world that you've shared a beverage of some kind with.
If I just think in recent history, in last year for International Women's Day, the Canadian ambassador to the OECD asked me to be guest speaker to a room full of ambassadors to talk about my journey and about women in the history of champagne.
Wow.
And it felt like a full circle moment for me, because it was hosted in this room that at the ambassador's residence that looked like a mini Versailles. And it's where, when I was working at the embassy, I would organize things for guest speakers and so on. But when I saw my name tag on the head table and speaking to a room full of OECD ambassadors who were my boss's bosses, it was like a sweet revenge in a sense, because I was like, yeah, my director reorged me out 5 years ago. 5 years later, I'm the guest speaker to your boss.
I love that.
And then the Canadian ambassador really appreciated what I did. And she said, look, I'm part of a group of 20 of the leading Canadian businesswomen, where we meet on a regular basis. once a year, we meet in a different country, and we're all getting on in age. This year, we're meeting in Paris, and we want to go to Champagne, and we want you to take us. And so I curated a 3-day tour for them, and it was amazing, not just because of what I organized, but to be able to spend 3 days with these badasses. Like one was the president of the Toronto Stock Exchange, or, like Ernst, general manager at Ernst & Young. Like these were really amazing ladies. And there's so many things during that trip, but one was being invited to lunch with Vitaly Tétinger, who is the CEO of Tétinger since January 2020, and being invited to her chateau and having the time with her, and picking her brain about sustainable development, about the environment, about leadership, about some of the challenges that she had as a woman in wine. And so that was special. And it was even more special. Like usually when I introduce whoever I'm taking to Champagne to one of the women, I tell her story and how wonderful and that she's a rock star and so on. So, I did that. But then what I wasn't expecting was when Vitaly turned the tables on me and told them all how respected I was in Champagne and that they were lucky to be with me. And I don't even remember what she said because I was just so shocked. And she secretly follows me on Instagram.
I love that.
But that's exceptional. What I love is experiences like whether it's a workshop in Paris last week or a trip I did last week, was I never expected to learn so much. When I hear that, or when someone in Champagne tells me that I taught them something, then that's what makes me happy.
Cynthia, it sounds like you're doing exactly what you need to do on this planet to impact all the lives of people around you. As you know, I'm going to be spending a week in Paris soon and a week in Champagne, and we've got a curated trip, which I'm very excited about. And if there was one thing I shouldn't miss in Champagne, what would you say that is? Either a house or somewhere you think I should see? What is one thing you think I shouldn't miss in Champagne?
Well, when people ask me to organize a trip for them, all of my trips are custom designed. Sure. And it really depends on people's interests, like if they're interested in art or architecture, food, military history. But most people jump on a train, go to Reims or Épernay, and they visit the cellars of big champagne houses, okay? They only see the bling bling side of Champagne, and they only see the aging cellars. In 2015, the hillsides, the cellars and the houses were inscribed on the UNESCO's World Heritage List. So if people don't go out into the hillsides and see the vineyards, they're missing an important piece of the puzzle. And so when it's someone's first trip, I always push and insist that we start with a visit to a small grower in the hillsides.
We have growers on our list for sure. I'm so excited about it.
I've got my favorite female run wineries in the vineyards. But there's so many, my Instagram is full of my favorite things.
I have been watching, and we're going to make sure we get people to go and follow you on Instagram to have a look at your site. And I would love to see what some of your favorite houses are, or favorite growers. Our trip has a combination and a lot of time in the vineyards, because that was one of my requests. And ours has been kind of curated with some of my favorites, as well as I wanted to experience kind of the behind the scenes. So that was something that was important to me on this trip as well. I know people don't go.
I just had an idea. There's a new museum. Calling it a museum is not doing it justice. It's a multi-sensory experience around Champagne, and it's called Pressoria. It's in
Okay.
Ai, and it's in the former press room of press center of Pommery, and they've converted it into this multi-sensory experience
Fun.
where, for example, you get to smell Chardonnay, a young Chardonnay, a middle-aged, and an aged, with these little like
Wow.
perfume things. You get to make your own blend on a tablet. It helps you like, it's very educational and it's very fun, especially the last room, which is designed, it's devoted to bubbles. And you learn all the facts again. And it was a collaboration with, there's this physicist at the University of Reims who studies the science of bubbles. Okay, he has this
That
high-speed
matters your
camera.
job.
I know. He's invited me to his lab. I really have to take him up on his
Yes,
offer.
you do.
He has a high-speed camera that takes pictures on the different ways of opening a bottle, the different ways of pouring, the different shapes of glasses, and how that impacts the bubbles. And I use his research in my in what I do. But it's this amazing room where you're surrounded by bubbles on the screens. And you finish with 2 glasses, one from a grower and one from a house. And it's on a terrace with a beautiful view of the vineyards.
Sounds divine. Oh, honey, what a great suggestion. I love it. I could talk to you for hours, I'm sure, but we don't have the luxury of all that time together. But I know people are going to want to know more about you, the trips you do, follow you on social media, understand more about the tastings, especially if they have the privilege of being in Paris, or if they want a trip curated to Champagne. Where can people find more about what you do?
On my website, delectabulles.com. On social media, Instagram and Facebook at Delectabulles. They can, if they want more of a professional connection, on LinkedIn via Cynthia. All of that's in the About section on my website. Yeah, I suppose that's a good start.
Perfect. Well, I would love to continue our conversation. Thank you for investing so much time. I really, really appreciate it. You have been such a delight. I think that you would be the perfect person to share a bottle with, because you would have so many stories from across the years.
Well, thank you very much. And my message to whoever listens to this is onwards and upwards like a champagne bubble.
Perfect analogy. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.